wonderful to see so many of our students. A special welcome to a new cohort we started this year, the new business candidates. I'm delighted that you were able to make it. It's important for all of us to come together every year to renew our commitment to diversity. The College of Education at William Paterson University is really committed to achieve diversity in 4 different areas. First, we are committed to providing all of our candidates, whether they are undergraduates or graduates, with a diverse curriculum, one that prepares them to be effective teachers, effective principals, effective counselors of all children. This is the part that I think our keynote speaker, María Elena Torre, will talk about, and is teaching for equity, teaching for social justice. Second, we are committed to recruiting, hiring, and retaining a diverse faculty. It's very important for us to provide you, teacher education candidates, graduate students, with diverse role models and diverse perspectives. Third, we are committed to recruiting, retaining, preparing, graduating diverse candidates. Just as it's important for you to have role models and the faculty that bring diverse perspectives, it's extremely important for us to provide the school with teacher candidates that share sometimes the ethnicity, the cultural background, the language of the children in the schools. Finally, as all of you know, we're most committed to providing all of our candidates, graduate and undergraduates, with experience in diverse schools, in diverse settings. It's important for you to have the opportunity to see firsthand the diverse population of New Jersey, the diverse population of this nation, to be prepared to be effective with children that are perhaps from backgrounds very different than your own. In the last few years, I have taken the opportunity of this diversity conference to kind of update the faculty and our students and myself on how we're doing in these areas. If you will, a report card for the College of Education in the area of diversity. As far as the curriculum goes, we know ourselves that we have to do a better job of preparing all of our candidates, grad and undergrad, to adapt instruction, better adapt instruction to diverse learners, either the English language learners or children with special needs. I want you to emphasize that in your curriculum, to ask those questions if you're one of our students. The observations that the reports that we get from the schools, from your supervisors, and from yourselves, actually, when you analyze what you've learned at William Paterson, say that we have to do a better job in that area, adapting instructions to English language learners and children with special needs. You're very good at dispositions. So highest marks on respecting other people's cultures, on believing that every child can learn and that it's your responsibility to make it so. In that sense, you get extremely high marks. In the adaptation of your lessons to different types of children, we could do a little better. When I say we, because it's our responsibility. As far as faculty, I'm delighted to say that the percentage of full-time faculty in the College of Education that come from underrepresented groups is 28%. You may not realize that, but this is very high compared to our sister institutions. For example, 18.5% of our faculty, full-time faculty, is African American. The comparison with our sister institutions in the state is only 6.1% African American. And I say you have to compare us with the state because we're blessed with high diversity in New Jersey. Last year, I reported to you at this conference that our undergraduate students from underrepresented groups comprise 23%. I have to say, I looked at the stats last night. I'm delighted to report that Fall 09, which is the last statistics that we have, our undergraduate student population is 32% from underrepresented groups. Unfortunately, we're not doing so well with our graduate students. Last year, I reported that our graduate students from underrepresented groups was 14%. This year is only 13%. Now, this is an area I think that the Diversity Committee and us in the administration for the College of Education should work together. How do we increase that percentage? How do we encourage people from underrepresented groups to pursue advanced degrees? Because we need principals, we need counselors at graduate level that reflect the diverse population that we have in our schools. Let me conclude my remarks by thanking Dr. Darlene Russell and her committee, the Diversity Committee, Dr. Allison Delbrick, Dr. Bernard Jones, and Dr. Robert Rimmer for putting together this excellent conference. We are looking forward to a very good speaker, María Elena Torre, and they have put together some very exciting workshops for you. We hope that the one from Rwanda works and Spike is with us. Thank you again to the committee. Let's give us a round of applause. And thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. Thanks again.
Thank the Dean for her very timely comments, and we hope that you will begin to look within and really answer some of the questions that she posed, and certainly some of the questions that emerged from today's conference. I welcome you to the Diversity Conference, and before I go any further, I just want to make a little announcement. Make sure that you don't eat in here, please, and if you can turn off your sounds, or PDAs, that would be lovely, just so we can be mindful of that and there will be no interruptions. Jambo, assalamu alaikum, shalom, hola, bonjour, ni hao. Hello to you all in a few languages. As I prepared for today, I thought about several things, and I thought about some quotes, and I happen to like quotes, and I pondered several, and I thought about something from Paulo Freire. I thought about something from the movie Stand and Deliver. I thought about something from Nell Noddings, and I thought about something from the writer Sandra Cisneros. I even thought about something from Bishop Tutu. And anything from these thinkers would have been powerful. However, when I looked at the cover of the latest issue of Rethinking Schools, I found what I was looking for. This past January, the world lost Howard Zinn, an educator, activist, who called us to critically examine history, transform the way we teach history, and view our fellow citizens. Zinn once said, which was on the cover of Rethinking Schools, if we want to have an effect on the world, we need to emphasize those things which will make students more active citizens and more moral people. Many people in the educational arena want to have an effect on the world, but are intimidated to do so for various reasons. To have an effect on the world, to me, requires ganas, which means, it's in Spanish for desire, a profound wanting of more, which means, to me, wanting with urgency as it pertains to education and beyond, equity for the disenfranchised, for the marginalized, and for the other. To have an effect on the world requires courage, which may mean advocating for justice and equity alone when everyone has scattered. It also means we must do more for and with our students if we want more from them. Our keynote speaker, Professor María Elena Torre, has the ganas and the courage. Her work is embedded in participatory action research and always includes the collective we. Her pronounced imprints are found in many places: schools, prisons, research and policy projects, national organizations and institutes, and the list goes on. I pay particular homage to Professor Torre for her work within prisons, because that's a place where many won't go. Professor Torre's work exudes activism, agency, and democracy. Not only is this her dedicated practice, but Professor Torre grooms what she calls radically diverse students into globally aware citizens who are not afraid to produce change in themselves and in the world. This is exemplified in her work with the Participatory Action Research Design Collective of the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. The work of this collective orbits around critical inquiry, social theory, and social justice for youth. Her work in the collective has produced many pro-peace and pro-justice projects and initiatives. As an educator, research, and passionate change agent, Professor Torre's work unsilences stories and experiences of oppressed groups. She not only talks about social injustices and inequities and hegemony, but she talks about, and she does, answer how we should confront these issues. From her work with the Opportunity Gap Project, she is the co-author of the acclaimed work, Echoes of Brown, Youth Documenting and Performing the Legacy of Brown versus the Board of Education. This book, with a DVD, visits past and present generational justice and injustice through the Brown versus Board of Education decision. In her book, she captures the legacy of Brown versus the Board of Education through youth scholars and civil rights activists and elders from the 1940s up until today. The research findings are presented in spoken word and dance and interviews, which she calls a scholarly and aesthetic experiment. This work has received rave reviews. One professor, in fact, from Alabama, in one of her reviews of the book, stated such: "I use this DVD and book each semester in my Foundations of Education course, and I love it. I have my pre-service students reflect on students' experiences in schools and discuss the isms students face on a daily basis, especially racism and socioeconomic classism. I would recommend this DVD and book for teachers, policymakers, professors, the average citizen, parents, and students. I think anyone who wants a better world and anyone who wants to improve our schools should see the DVD at the bare minimum." And then she says, "Echoes of Brown is wonderful," and she has like 5 exclamation marks. So that's a testimony or a testament to Professor Torre's work. In addition to the Echoes of Brown book, a sampling of Professor Torre's work includes Changing Minds, the Impact of College on a Maximum Security Prison. She has also been published in volumes such as Everyday Anti-Racism, Concrete Ways to Successfully Navigate the Relevance of Race in School. and Urban Girls Revisited, the Handbook of Action Research. Some of Professor Torre's articles, chapters, and books and press include Researching for Justice, Participatory Action Research from Within and Across Difference. Beyond the Journal article, Representations, Audience, and Products of Research. Researching Together Across Difference, Methods for Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning. Moving to the Rhythm of Social Justice, Urban Young Women's Experiences of Research and Action, and Intimate Details, Participatory Action Research in Prisons. Professor María Elena Torre is the founding director of the Public Science Project at the Graduate Center of the University of New York, so right across the bridge. Professor Torre earned her Bachelor of Arts degree from the New School for Social Research. She is an esteemed doctoral candidate in the Social Personality Psychology doctoral program. She is a recipient of the American Psychological Association Division 35 Adolescent Girls Task Force. She is also on the board of the National Latino Education Research and Policy Project, What Kids Can Do, and the Diversity Advancement Project. Emerging Scientists, and the Spencer Fellowship in Social Justice and Social Development in Educational Studies. From Professor Torre's impressive research and work in social justice, and the conference theme, Confronting Borders in Schools, Teaching for Equity, Justice, and Global Citizenship, it is evident that she has confronted many borders and has made a pronounced and active moral effect on the world. So it is with overwhelming enthusiasm that I present to you our keynote speaker, a powerhouse teacher, dream keeper, and change agent, Professor María Elena Torre. Please join me in giving a very warm William Paterson University welcome to our honored guest.
Thank you all. Thank you to the Dean of Education, to the Diversity Committee, to all of you for spending your Friday morning with me. Thank you for that amazing introduction. I think all you need now is my shoe size, and you'll know every last thing about me. So I'm really honored to be here. And I'm just want to do a little time check. It's 9:46, and we're 10:35. All right. I just want to be mindful so that we don't keep you captive for too long. In the next 45-ish minutes, I'm going to take you through Echoes of Brown, which you heard a little bit about, and tell you about the impact of participatory inquiry. Anybody here familiar with, first of all, let me just get a sense of who's in the room. Hands for folks who are becoming teachers? All right. Any already teachers? Okay, excellent. Great. And then faculty, my guess. Yes? Some faculty? All right. Good. So we're all teachers and learners together collectively across many of our own borders here. So how about participatory action research? Is that a familiar term, not a familiar term? PAR, or participatory action research? Okay. Participatory action research in a nutshell is basically when folks, instead of doing research on people, where you sort of take the traditional microscope or your notepad and you're studying folks, right? Instead of doing that, it's researching with. So this kind of the big shift is instead of on, it's with. And those who are at the center of whatever issue you're interested in, they collaborate with you, you become co-researchers, and together the folks at the center of the question take the lead in determining what are the questions to be studied, what research design and methods are appropriate, how to make sense of the findings. So it's sort of an expanded notion of expertise. It kind of pushes the border of who gets to be an expert, who gets to be a researcher, right? So not just folks on high in the academy in their ivory towers, but everyday people are, have very critical ideas and information and knowledge about their everyday lives. It assumes, for example, that the folks that, often at the bottom of social hierarchies have a very particular lens it's key in understanding certain kinds of questions. In other words, the folks that clean this room probably know a lot more about us than we know about them, right? They know if we don't recycle our bottles. They know how we treat the bathroom, if we're pick up after ourselves or not. They know all kinds of intimate and public details about our lives when we sometimes don't even think about them at all, right? So thinking about where knowledge lies, right? Okay. Anyways, so I'm just going to jump right into this project. It generated about 5 years ago with a group of superintendents here in New Jersey and in New York City, not New York City, rather New York State. They're inner ring suburbs of Manhattan and New York. But they were largely superintendents of school districts that were obviously integrated with big high schools in them that allegedly, for all intents and purposes, were integrated schools. However, as we well know, often in these big high schools, once you pass through the front door, kids kind of just move to their own areas. So unfortunately in the US, what ends up happening often is kids of color go to the bottom floors, literally where basic classes and special ed often is located. And white and wealthier kids kind of rise up in the school because, you won't believe this, but it is true, very, very often the AP and honors courses are literally at the top of the school. If you move out to the west, where buildings don't go up, it goes back to front. This is a very, I don't know if it's an architectural coincidence or what, but we've found this over and over and over and over and over again. The biggest shock to me was how it's mirrored on the West Coast, where it goes back to front instead of up and down. Nonetheless, so about 4 years ago, or 5 years ago rather, a bunch of superintendents, not really a bunch, 13 of them came together and decided that they wanted to look at the testing data. In New York State and New Jersey, testing data had to be, a new policy came into play, and testing data had to be disaggregated by race. Before that, schools were able to sort of hide in the lower scores. Now, all of a sudden, in some of these wealthier neighborhoods, or communities rather, everybody was opening up the newspaper, and what was called the achievement gap, or what's commonly called the achievement gap, was very public, right? And in order to really ask some hard questions, these superintendents thought it made more sense to come together so one school district wouldn't look like the racist district, right? Because really this is a national issue. We were asked to join, forgive me, Mike, I think I'm coming down with a cold. And we said, okay, we'd love to participate in trying to understand what's going on here with these test scores that are sort of all over the place. And as you know, white and wealthier kids tend to do better on standardized tests, and poorer kids and kids of color tend to not do so well. And we said, we're happy to join in, but we can only do so if we bring a team of youth researchers, because as I was saying, right, those who are at the center of the experience have really key and important knowledge and deep perspectives about what the dynamic is, things that we could never know on the outside. So we spent time in all of the schools and started to identify, sort of get the culture of the schools. This was a team of graduate students from the City University of New York. And eventually we recruited about 100 young people from 7 different schools within those districts. And again, we wanted the group to be as diverse as possible so that we could have, as the dean was mentioning, as many different perspectives on the issue as we could get. So from the group, and let me just I can show you the recruitment this was a recruitment flyer. You didn't have to have good grades. You didn't have to be a star student. What you needed to do is have some strong opinions. Well, I won't read it to you. You can all read this. But so what came of this is that we got some core groups of young people from all corners of the school buildings, from inside AP classes to outside the principal's offices. Some had spent years in special ed. Others had run for student government. Some had never left the Spanish wing, as it was called in one of the high schools I was in. Some had been beaten up for looking too gay. Others had played varsity football. Some enjoyed 2 homes. Others had spent nights without one. And one young man in our group got his GED while he was incarcerated. So while they had many differences across them, they were all dedicated to better understanding public schools, and they all believed that all students should have equal access to high-quality education. Okay, so this is the group, one of the groups that came together. Together we designed a multi-generational, multi-district, urban-suburban database of youth and elder experiences with the intent of tracing the history of a struggle for desegregation and analyzing social science evidence of contemporary educational opportunities and inequities by race, ethnicity, and class. And we organized our work around a series of research camps. In the very first research camp, a young person came up to me and said, we were about literally 40 minutes into the day. We had organized everybody, explained what was going on. There was teams of youth from 7 different schools. And everybody was, we were going to build a survey together. And everybody was sort of set in their own corners, working on different aspects of the survey. And this one group came up to me and one of my colleagues and said, you know, this sounds like a really interesting project, but if I'm going to continue with you, we need to do something about the name. So I was like, okay, you know, open to hearing whatever. And he said, when you call it the achievement gap, that means it's our fault. It really should be called the opportunity gap, because it's about the opportunities that are available to us, not whether or not we can achieve. That's why you do participatory action research, right? We were just using the dominant frame, the achievement gap. That's how it's been called everywhere. Cover of Newsweek, right? New York Times. The young people were able to say, it's not about achievement, it's about opportunities. It's about what structures, policies, and practices are happening in our nation's schools that are producing this result, right? The assumption that we heard earlier, that every student has the ability to achieve and learn, given the right set of circumstances. Okay, so on our very first research camp in our early morning together, we had to start to debunk who gets to do research, like I was saying, and who doesn't. And so this one young person, we said, you know, draw a researcher. In fact, I should have asked you, if we had more time, I'd just ask you in your head to visualize what you think of when you think of a researcher, right? You generally think, most people, adults and youth, of somebody who looks slightly like Einstein, right? Bald, older, lab coat, glasses, white, male, right? Not this one. This is not the researcher, right? So kind of to flip the script a little bit, to get young people to start to feel themselves as researcher, we did a whole bunch of different kinds of activities. They created a survey that went out to about 10,000 young people, in the majority of which were in New York and New Jersey. There were a few in Delaware and a few later on in California. It was translated into Spanish, Haitian Creole, Braille, and distributed to 9th and 12th graders. All right. They included, it was largely Likert scale questions, right? So you check a box. But there were also some open-ended questions. This is one of them. Describe what you imagine to be the best possible school experience. You can see the sort of range of sampling of answers here. Not hearing faggot used in everyday speech. A place where you can be yourself, express your opinions, and be comfortable walking around. Your worst possible school experience. Being made fun of because I couldn't speak English well. Having no friends and fearing people in your class so much that you're afraid to raise your hand to speak. Right? Mean teachers, no friends, physically threatening and emotionally upsetting students other than myself. Bottom line, no hope. So it was a range of things. All right. When we came back, we did a series of research camps, right? We designed a whole bunch of methods to learn how to do interviews, focus groups, created a survey, perfected the survey, whatnot, sent it out. Then we all came together later on, few research camps down the road, and once the data started to come in to analyze together. So this is young people and adults together analyzing the data. One of the things that became really challenging for the group was that there was a fair amount of evidence that what the young people in schools were experiencing and feeling and hearing was what's happening in society at large, right? So there was a question that asked students to explain the opportunity or achievement gap. And we got responses like, the reason why is that poor young people are less smart because they have genes that put their family in that situation, right? So young people who are the researchers started to see that their peers were, and this is just one example that a young person wrote up on what we created, a graffiti wall, that their peers were having really racist responses to and interpretations to the achievement gap, right? Blaming genes, blaming families, and basically victim blaming. It characterized a lot of the surveys. So the youth researchers who were visibly shaken as they realized that their peers had these profoundly biased views provoked us to realize that we needed to respond to this and to find a way to channel all of the emotion of dealing with this data that sometimes was pretty ugly. Not only were the findings showing these disparities of injustice, but there were, flat out expressions of bias. So we created a graffiti museum, and that was just basically large pieces of paper where young people could take the data and respond back to it, right? So here's an example of that. Here's another one. Genetically, some races are more intelligent than others. We had just ripped pieces of it off later. Okay. So then once we had all of the data, we started to do present feedback sessions in the schools. And some of them went very well. And we give the schools their own data as well as the consortium so they could have a context to understand the inequities. Some of them, however, didn't go so well. In one of the schools in a nearby town here, actually, a couple towns over, the group of youth researchers were interested. They did the survey in their school, and then they did a whole bunch of focus groups and interviews. And in the survey, they started to see that black boys were being sent to in-house suspension at much higher numbers than any other group in the school. So one of our youth researchers, a young man named Kareem, was a junior in that school and a youth researcher, like I said, and he really wanted to investigate this issue, and they put together a PowerPoint presentation for their faculty, and the administration in their high school chose sympathetic faculty. And so in this presentation, Kareem said, now let's turn to the suspension data. I'd like you to take a look, and please notice that the black males in the high schools across the board were twice as likely, and in ours in particular, as white males to be suspended. And there's almost no difference between black males and black females. But for whites, males are 3 times more likely to be suspended. So altogether, we have 22% of black males, 19% of females, and only 11% of white males and 4% of females being suspended. The educators in that particular, these were sympathetic educators, and they sat there like this, right? And he said, Kareem continued, he's like, you know me, and this was true. I spent a lot of time in the discipline room. Really, it's almost all black boys. So they started, few nods, but mostly they were like this. And Kareem, mind you, just get the full picture. It was a few years ago when the baggy pants were really in style. His pants were like way down. He had like a big sweatshirt on, right? And he is saying, but listen, from my own personal experience, and he's giving them anecdotes from his own experiences in the being sent to in-house suspension and being suspended. He says, so finally, one of the teachers said, maybe when you're not there, it's different. And he's like, and then another teacher said, it gets whiter. And this is a true quote. It gets whiter. Sometimes there are white kids when you're not there, and in June, when people get suspended, it gets whiter. So we all stood there like, you know, the adults were in the corner going, I don't know how to, what do we do with this? And the other students were also very puzzled. Kareem kept persisting, and he said, you don't have to believe me. Look at the survey, and he had his charts and his graphs. I speak for the hundreds of black males who filled out this survey. There was something like 700 in that school. We have to do something about this. Eventually, what ended up happening in that presentation is that one of the other youth researchers who was white, Kareem was African American, this young man was white, he was one of the basketball players. He and Kareem were friendly, you know, in our group, but not best friends outside. He steps in and he says, let me just say a few words. He's like, you know, in AA, they have a saying that first you have to recognize the problem, right? So then he does this whole translation. And when he first got up to speak, I thought, oh goodness, you know, what is Chris going to do? And, but then he started with this AA, and I guess that's some sort of white speak that communicates across. Nonetheless, after too many experiences like this where we realized, you know, we were running into traps with these obsessive questions from audience members. What's wrong with them, meaning the students? Even in the same school building, we have a gap. Teachers and administrators really committed to the tracking system, or I think in New Jersey sometimes it's called leveling, where, you know, you sort of have all the stratifications. How else can we teach students at their ability, right, if we don't have these tracks and these levels? So we became a little bit wary, even of sympathetic audiences, wondering, we sort of either had this response or a very emotional response, where sometimes folks would even tear up. But there was no move to action or questioning or anything like that. So the young people got tired, basically, of doing these presentations to audiences that they felt like weren't hearing them. This is one young woman on that graffiti wall. She drew what it felt like for her to be in school. She's an African-American young woman. Let's see what else I've got going on. Okay. So at any rate, what we ended up doing was we shifted to performance. And that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today. The young people a lot of them were interested in spoken word. And they were wanting to use other forms, other artistic forms to try to shake people up, because they felt like we have really good data, but it's not getting through, right? It's hitting a brick wall. Okay, so we gathered another group, 2 of the original youth researchers from that group of about, well, there were over 100 in total, but 2 of them continued with us, and this was a much smaller group, so another 11 joined. We had a new group of 13, also radically diverse across all kinds of levels and ways of looking at them. And we came together really for just 1 week in the summer, and then it continued over a series of Saturdays. During this week, it was called an Arts and Social Justice Institute. We brought together social science. We took all the data from the Opportunity Gap Project, all of the surveys and responses and all of the interviews and focus group data, brought that all together. This new group of youth studied all of that in the mornings, did a lot of knowledge building. We brought in scholars, historians, lawyers to talk about different social justice movements, to integrate schools for different kinds of populations. So not just around black and white, but also the Latino and ELL movement, disability rights folks, so that these young people could remember that there was a time when kids who are handicapped were not even allowed to be in school, right? So to think about all these connected movements. And in the mornings, like I said, we did a lot of knowledge building so that young people could participate in a more equal way with each other and with the adults that were in the room. And then in the afternoons, we did spoken word, because that was the activity of choice for them, and also dance. There were also some dancers in the group. And so, again, none of the young people had to be experts at any of this. They just had to be willing to try. There was a lot of hesitancy around the dance. All right. So I'm just going to show you a couple of clips just for you to give a sense. And the idea now wasn't necessarily to give young people voice, like to lift their voices, young people already have voices, right? And they are very loud on occasion. Some of them are quiet. Mostly the problem is that adults forget how to listen to them, right? So not only is it a forgetting how to listen, but also it's thinking about young people as active participants, right? So engaging in the doing and the thinking and all that, not just spewing their mind, okay? So it was a really an honest attempt to try to work collaboratively like you would with your peer, with an adult. All right, so here's a clip. I'm not the most technological genius, so I'll hold tight for a second. One of the products of this work was a book and a DVD, as you heard. This was our first DVD that we ever made. We made a huge mistake. If you're ever going to make a DVD or any kind of film, put chapters in it. Otherwise, you have what we have, which is a very nice, long chapter that you can't queue up. So here we go.
I'm fond of saying that I first became a true American citizen on May 17, 1954, which is the date of the Brown case decision, where that umbrella of separate and equal was removed.
The Brown case, which was one of many, many cases, was a very difficult case because it had to overcome hundreds of years of discrimination.
In my school, even though it's integrated, it's still segregated. Like I said, there's school desegregation cases in Brooklyn, there's school desegregation cases in parts of Queens, there's school desegregation issues within Manhattan. Black kids stay with the black kids, the white kids stay with the white kids, and in the middle, like, they kind of mingle, but not very much.
Like, it's the whole thing starting all over again. But hopefully that'll change.
You have to do today. You have to, in your communities, reach out to all the other oppressed people.
I feel that the youth are the future of tomorrow, and the youth's words are gold. It's the treasure.
We have got to unite together with every group that's oppressed. When we stand that way, we can win.
So those interviews were done with young people interviewing the elders during those morning sessions. These are the afternoon sessions.
Use any of the statistics you saw today that you want. Like, for instance, there was a statistic about suspensions that showed people are suspended more than anybody else.
When I started, what if my son was born black? Was talking, or you're talking to the kid that said, you know, that's Latinos, they're genetically inferior.
I'm good at like analytical papers that they give us in school, like a poem or something like that. I haven't like written about too. So it'll be. I think that's one of the things that makes me scary, just like adjusting, like to everything that we're going to be doing. So.
And in addition to that, you will have your own experiences with school, with the world around you, etc., etc.
First write that, right, and then kind of come out of that and start to look at the things that we have in common, and look at like how we all kind of obviously care about racism and the importance of success and the importance of life, and then just go from there. All right?
All right? Cool. Very cool. I'm going to give you about 15 minutes for that.
Okay. I'm just going to jump ahead for another minute, show you a couple, like a minute and a half clip or so. And then, so one of the things that you see is that the young people are starting with, again, because of a participatory approach, right, assumes that these young folks have intimate knowledge about the structural practices in their schools, right? But we wanted to move not just from their individual lives, we wanted them to be able to see that in a larger context. So they had the data, like I said, from the opportunity gap. And then they also had interviews that they were conducting and discussions with folks who study these issues and have been involved in larger civil rights movements for over the years. All right, let's jump ahead to 8:04.
Turn it up a little bit.
Oh, for sure. I will do.
I don't have extremely fast muscle memory, so like learning segments of choreography, just not that graceful.
And then you want to punch.
So these are just regular kids, right?
So hold on a second. So instead of it being the same arm as the leg, we'll do the opposite. So the left arm with that right leg. There you go. 5, 6, 7, 8, and right. Yes. And
I want to do poetry. I really hope I don't have to dance though.
Right, left, right, step, left, right, left, step, right. Yes. So once you get it started, you want it to go into muscle memory. So you're not thinking, because if you keep thinking about it, then you can blank out. Right? But if you lock into the rhythm, 1, 2, 3,
A really good dancer in the back is one of the dancer choreographers that worked with us, this guy. He's not a young person. Well, he's younger, but he's not a young person.
I really just, my body doesn't move like that.
You will with practice. You will with practice. Uh-huh. Oh, that's all right. There will be many other things that you will have never done before. Right? And just a word, can't, I've never done it, will not excuse you from this room.
Okay, so basically, as Ron Brown here, he was the lead choreographer and dancer who worked with us, and then he brought members of his dance troupe called Evidence. He underscores that really all they had to do was try, just try, and that was it, and be willing and be open. But as you can see, with the poetry, with the dance, there was a little hesitation, and that layered on to the other work that we were doing was really ended up being, we learned, very important, because having a range of activities allowed kids to shine in some moments and stumble in others. To break stereotypes, Amir really was not a great dancer. He's an African-American male, the stereotype of all black folks can dance. He could not dance, right? Eleanor, white girl, she could not dance, okay? But they figured it out, and they saw each other in different, it allowed for multiple identities to be in the room, right? And for folks to engage across in unexpected ways. Okay, so when we did begin, though, even though there was a unifying motivation, it was definitely experienced differently among the youth researchers. Some of the more privileged youth saw themselves as working for, right, and helping those less advantaged. However, over time, the research camps with all the empirical data that we had, it created a common space to intellectually wrestle with and respond to the injustices that define the schools that these young people were attending. Because again, most of these young folks went to the very schools where the survey and all that data came from. All right, so whether it was through challenging, as you'll see later, the principal and the PTA to get rid of AP classes after a devastating analysis of the exclusionary practices of high-track classes in their district, or questioning the school suspension policies that we just heard about in a school that disproportionately suspended African-American male students. Engaging in this kind of collaborative inquiry across difference allowed these very differently positioned students to acknowledge, theorize, and act on the ways they were mutually implicated in each other's life. So it shifted to, this is my issue too, and I'm being affected by these practices, not just, wow, I'm kind of cruising through school with no problem. That young woman, Eleanor, she talked to me at the end of the project and said, when I started, I was a little skeptical. I kind of thought people were blowing things out of proportion, right? And over time, through this project and through this way of co-learning and co-investigating, she came to see that there was tons and tons of data that were backing up these individual overblown, quote-unquote, stories that she thought. She had to shift her analysis and create a new way of thinking about it. All right, I'm going to show you one other clip. And let me just pause. So as they're going through, they started to create their own poems, and then we would have these feedback read-around sessions where they would work through them. So here's one.
Go Blue is like, it's something I mentioned here. It's like my school slogan, like for sports. Like our color is blue, so they go Blue.
Go Blue roars the bumper sticker on the back of her SUV. A cell phone covered by blonde hair. She pulls out of her Starbucks parking space without looking in the rearview mirror. Horns retaliate. I sigh. This is my hometown.
Go Blue, their SUVs roar as they drive past the ghetto part of town. They believe they don't see the bullet holes in doors, the boarded up windows, the train tracks where houses should be.
Drive by the houses with 7 bedrooms. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, you can see the indoor swimming pools, hear the swish of tennis rackets, and pretend that it all looks like this.
When I'm out on the street in South Orange, you know, if I'm not on the other side of the town, you know, I get different, you know, vibes from people than I do if I'm on my side, you know. Because I would say Scotland Road is like the race line, like where it separates, you know.
And in the classroom, the imbalance is subtle, undercurrents in hallways, AP classes on the top floor, special ed in the basement. And although over half the faces in the yearbook are darker than mine, on the 3rd floor, everyone looks like me.
Though dark faces paint 55% of the hallway, segregation still reigns in the cafeteria, in AP classes, and detention. Just don't let the state know, but say hush hush and ride the pseudo-underground railroad, this free ticket to funding from the Board of Ed.
Flashback to 9/11 vigil. My friend wrote a poem about freedom. It rhymes and has flow. Principal won't let him near the podium because it's like a rap. And after all, white people hate anything with rhythm, and only white people attend 9/11 vigils.
We will make our own history, write our own books. We will burn these halls until we get our answers, because we'll huff and we'll puff and we'll blow their shit down.
I like the reality that she's putting there about like 55%, you know, dark faces and everything. The cafeteria is very well segregated. Yeah, like in my school, it's 51% black, 46% white, and like whatever in the middle. When you go into the cafeteria, it's like you have 2 cafeterias, you know, and most of the white kids go out for lunch, and then the rest of them stay in the new cafeteria, and the other ones stay in the black cafeteria. You know what I mean? In the old cafeteria, and it's like, you know, it's mixed a little between the two, but not really. And, you know, that got to me really, you know, definitely okay.
Once you get black students into a place, that's not the end of the game.
So I'm saying this education thing is important, but not necessarily just putting bodies next to each other, you know, in a very uneven fashion. But, you know, but when you put bodies next to each other, you got to have people who understand what that means, you know.
Okay. So here Sonia's not just talking about the next step, right? So first we integrate, and then what do? You know, if we're living in a culture that doesn't really allow too many spaces for folks to really engage difference, to talk about the ways that our lives are differently determined by the set of circumstances and conditions that we're living in, what are we left with? And what this project allowed for is, for example, like Kendra, when she's trying to make sense of what's happening in her own school, right? The white young woman that you just saw. She takes pieces of the data, integrates them into her spoken word, and then now Amir has a way, the two of them have a way of talking about the practices in their school, right? So it's not about you're a racist, I'm a racist, this, that. It's about, it's taken, even though it starts with their personal and lived experiences, it then shifts to larger structural systemic analyses, right? So after that conversation, Natasha, who you met a little earlier with the feather earrings, an African-American youth performer in the project, she jumped in after Amir and talked about how in her school, it was really easy for her to relate to Kendra's poem because they had, because of busing, 2 separate buses. So they would go allegedly to the same school, but immediately after school, the black kids would go to one bus and the white kids would go to another, right? And then later in the week, you can see the sort of infectious nature of the conversation developing. Ariane, an African-American youth performer, wrote a poem that said, "Tell me if this makes sense." She said, "I think something is missing. The policy of separating? There was a policy? A strategy to segregate? Yeah, there was, and now it's moved from policy to normalcy. It's normal now for kids like me, urban kids, minority kids, to ask, why am I the only Black, Asian, or Latina in my AP class?" She was the youngest of the group. She was 14. So the following October, we met for this week, right? And then a series of Saturdays. And basically what was happening is, in their desire to shift to performance and to create something with the data that would move people, around the same time it was the anniversary of Brown versus Board. And we were asked to put on a performance using the data that we had in a larger venue. So they were working, their sort of collaborative project was to take all of this information and turn it into this performance that was going to happen in May. Immediately afterwards, not immediately, but the next school year in October, Eleanor, who was the one who was talking about she didn't have muscle mass in her body to dance, she and one of her peers, who's also was a white young woman in the project, she and Joanna were asked by their principal, who was very sympathetic to this project and knew about it and was excited about their involvement, to speak at a PTA meeting about how to get more kids of color in the AP classes, sort of addressing Ariane's question. So they went there and said, we told them that they should just get rid of AP classes altogether. They had it all wrong. We explained to them how tracking works and how it ends up segregating students and lowering expectations for the majority. But they didn't want to hear it. And the parents were getting really upset. Right? So I met up with her afterwards because several of us, the young women in the project, were writing an essay about it for a book. And so I was showing them a draft that we were all editing together. And that's when she told us about this meeting that she had had in her school and how frustrating it was that what happened in truth was that Joanna and Eleanor had a much more sophisticated analysis of the inequities that are built into these AP classes that are reserved for just a few kids, right? And just simply plucking in one Latino here and one African American there is not really addressing what's happening for kids of color across the board in these very same high schools. So I'm going to show you one last clip, and then a poem afterwards, of how you see young folks across different sort of working together, building on their ideas. 41.
What is the psychology of that?
Integration.
I think there are some cool lines in there that could kind of go into it.
So what you do is you put a little star next to those. After you get the form pretty much totally made, you're like, where can I slide this in? You know what I mean? Once you get the frame, then you can like put anything in there. You know, it's like once you have a dresser, you can put any clothes in the drawers. But you need the dresser to know where to put the clothes down.
At the beginning, did you say something about your methodology? All right.
Okay, so just a setup. This is the poet educator, Roger, and Eleanor and Natasha had each written their own poem, and they had used the same word in their poem. They'd each used larynx, right? Kind of a random word. And so the poet educator put them together because they had this word in common. So it wasn't because of any larger design around racial inequality, equality and, getting together and becoming friends. It was really because, as poets, they used an interesting word. So he put them together to see what would happen with their work. And now they're trying to create a collaborative piece.
There is a hymn called the doxology that at that point that you could probably, since you can sing, like overlay over it. But praise God for all blessings.
All right. So I'll check back in with you guys in like 10 minutes.
What I'm going to understand while you're singing.
Okay, so stop at the very top.
Yeah, why not?
Okay, it doesn't feel good to be silent. As a matter of fact, it's just plain uncomfortable. Kind of like when the bully decides that he wants to get violent.
Kind of like when the bully decides that he wants to get violent, so he puts you in a headlock so tight that he crushes your larynx.
Or voice box.
Or boxed voice.
My windpipe is pulled like a cylinder of chewing gum by dry, ashy fingers well into my pelvis.
And I hate to tell this, but even after he releases, my neck is in pieces.
And now this one that I wrote last night, I don't know where that, like, is that, we're going to be saying that in discordance, or are we going to be saying that together?
Can you read it again?
It doesn't feel good to be silent.
It doesn't feel good to be silent.
This kingdom suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force.
And this kingdom suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force.
God has written my fate, O silencer, you cannot change my course.
God has written my fate, O silencer. You cannot change my course.
But remember and understand that silence is a choice. Praise God from whom all blessings flow.
I was given 2 ears and 1 tongue. Can't I listen more than I speak? Where's the harm in that? The lent in silent means I'm giving that space back.
And I think if you compact it towards the end, then it creates an excellent
No,
frame.
you know what we should do? We should do the second 2 lines, race and global features. When we talk about like how people don't speak up with racism in public.
Oh, okay.
All right.
42% of white American teenagers speak up when they hear racist comments.
Bold, decisive, be fierce, be confident, be honest.
But what kind of schools do we have where 58% of white teenagers don't speak out against hatred? Where 58% of white students don't speak out against hatred?
Being quiet is a strong choice.
Except when it isn't.
Except when it isn't.
Except when it isn't.
Okay. So I show that piece just because those 2 young women came to the project really differently. Eleanor is the young woman I told you about who's a little skeptical, right, in the beginning. Natasha also came in a little wary. Before she started the summer week, her mom said to her, go, have fun, enjoy yourself, but just be aware. Sometimes, you know, when people put these things together, they're operating from a little white guilt, right? They feel like they're responsible and for all the injustices, and they're just trying to make good. So have fun, but just be aware. So when I interviewed her and she shared the story with me, I said to her, she's like, but then she quickly followed. She's like, but then I was there and I could see that things were different. So I said, well, what was different? As part of what I was trying to understand in my participation in this project, again, it was a youth-adult partnership, right? So all of us were bringing our different agendas to the work. We had a common agenda to take this important information about school inequalities and policies and practices that were disproportionately affecting kids of color, negatively affecting them. So we were all engaged in that group project, but we each had some of our own political agendas, some of our own interests, right? Because we were each representing different communities with our bodies, with our families, right, with our neighborhoods. So the young people knew that one of my interests was how do we create these spaces for young people and for adults to really engage with each other around hard questions, right? So that we don't just continue reproducing and living in our different positions, but we think about ways to interrupt them, right? To make them visible, to make the injustice visible, and then to interrupt it. So I said to Natasha, so what changed? And she said, well, in our first morning, because we would do these morning sessions, we were doing knowledge building. In our first introductory session, she said, you and Michelle and I think it was Rosemary talked about high power groups and low power groups. So I knew it wasn't just going to be a black and white issue, right? You talked about, she referred to the ways that we complicated the various ways that some of us have power and privilege and some of us don't, but that within one person, that can shift and change, right? That in some spaces, because you're a woman, you may be marginalized, but because you're white, you might have power. or because you're gay, that we have multiple identities, and that to use these, we said to them that we were interested in letting them be free, all of these identities, letting them be visible and active in the room, using the knowledge that we have from our various positions and from our various identities, but also recognizing the ways that power shifts. And that helped her recognize that this wasn't just folks operating out of white guilt, right? So that was an important piece for her. But that just begs the question of what kinds of things, when you're trying to create spaces where folks who normally don't sit down together at the table can build new knowledge, right? Whether it be in your future classrooms. This looks like an elaborate project. We did have money to make a video. It actually didn't cost a whole lot. The video did, that I will give you, but the rest really didn't cost a whole lot, right? We used borrowed spaces. We were in that floor that you saw almost every day, and we got volunteers to come in. So it looks like it's a little bigger budget than it was, but even in your own classrooms, how do you start to engage hard questions, right? A lot of times when I talk about this work, folks say, oh, that's really great, but my students aren't ready. And often, as I was just saying earlier to one of your colleagues, that who's not ready is really the adults. Because young people are very ready, very ready. They're living, all of us are living these conditions, right? And living in these separate spaces or mixed up spaces, but we just don't really have the opportunity to address it, to engage it. And once you do, all kinds of things unfold. So part of what helped us create this space is that we assumed that all the people in the group, all the researchers, all the performers had, like I said, important knowledge and expertise about their lives, right? That they were all connected to communities that they were then responsible to, right? So whether that made them hesitant to participate or excited to participate, it was because of these connections to community, because of history, right? They have a certain idea of what a teacher is, what a classroom is, what a researcher is. You have to address that head on, right? Make it a different space. That, again, we talked about power, right? That it wasn't about guilt, but it was about just recognizing this is how the social arrangements are laid out. What do we do with it? If I, as a college or university-based person in the group, have certain kinds of connections that were useful for the group, right? So I had a certain kind of power in that space. But when Amir talked about, the last thing I'll share with you, as I'm mindful of the time, when he wrote this poem later about his experience in special ed, part of the reason he opened up about it was because he knew that in our group, the work was going to move, right? Because there were members that had folks who, in publishing, right, that had friends in places where TV would come in, or that there were a lot of adults in the space that were going to use their power and to collaboratively forward our collective agenda. The last two other things that I want to talk about is another important thing is that we recognize that there were going to be disagreements, right? We weren't working for some consensus or overall, like, let's hold hands and all be friends, right? They did all of them become friends, but that wasn't the point of why we were together. We were together to have hard conversations and to let people move through their ideas. So for Eleanor, it was okay for her to think that the stories were overblown, right? Because she had to think that, recognize it, and then move to a new place, right? If we just pretended that didn't exist, if the tensions weren't there, while we were meeting, we had the Harvey Milk School, which is a school for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender kids in New York City, got a big chunk of change, right? And the adults in the group were all excited. And the young people were like, what? I don't get it. This is just segregation all over again. Isn't that what we're against? Isn't that what this whole project is against? So we had a really heated discussion where all of us were debating, what do you do in situations where the burden of integration is literally paid on kids' backs, right? So the kids that get shoved into lockers. And in fact, Amir, who will be the last person I'll show you, he was the one who finally made the bridge. He was very committed to integration and still is, but he recalled back through our conversation, he's like, you're right, the gay kids in my school, they keep getting shoved into lockers. And so he started to make a case of like, well, when do we need safe spaces and when do we need integrated ones? And can we have safe spaces in integrated spaces? But really laying out the complications. Whereas some of the other young folks were saying, no, we have to have integration at all costs. And that's the only way we're going to move forward. And calling up different incidents in the civil rights movement when people did pay with their lives. So it was really interesting, and we didn't try to come to a conclusion on it, but we used the conversation to tease out what are the issues, right? What do we really have to learn and understand in order to figure out how we're going to relate and move forward together? And part of what helped that happen was being clear with everyone that we're all under construction, right? That we as individuals are under construction, that our ideas are shifting and changing, and that we as a group are too, and that that's okay. That we don't have to push towards a solution all the time immediately. That there can be some developmental work that's going on. So Amir, I'm going to close with Amir. He and I had worked together in one of the high schools for all throughout the Opportunity Gap Project. He was an original researcher. He never told even though we were doing all of these things that I'm telling you about, like engaging difference and talking about power and we talked about tracking, he never shared the fact that he was in special ed, not once. In his school, it's called leveling. So level 1s and 2s were special ed. And he had all his classes, for the most part, were in level 1 and 2. And on like the Thursday of our week together, he wrote the poem that I'm going to share with you, we'll close with. And afterwards, I said, Amir, I was so floored that he had read this poem and disclosed about his special education status and whatnot. And I was like, we did all this work together. We've been, talking about all these issues. We've been doing all. I was like, how come you didn't share it before? And he said, a couple of things happened. One is that over the course of the week, in our knowledge building sessions, when we talked and interviewed elders, one of the dancers talked about Katherine Dunham and told the story. Katherine Dunham was an African-American dancer and choreographer, and she was also an anthropologist. She did a lot of African dance and Caribbean dance. They performed in St. Louis, and it was during Jim Crow. And when they were doing their opening pieces, they saw that the audience, all the white folks were in the orchestra, and all the African-American folks were up in the balcony. And when they came out during I don't go to a lot of dance, in the intermission, if that's the appropriate term, after the intermission, they came out, all the dancers, and they wore placards that said, we won't return to St. Louis until our brothers and sisters in the balcony can sit in the orchestra. And they walked off the stage. So Amir, in hearing that story as part of our conversations, didn't make any comments, but for him it triggered his own experiences of being in the balcony in his school, just allegedly for convenience. The special ed students have to sit in the balcony during all school-wide performances, right? So here he is in special ed where students of color are overrepresented, and they're up in the balcony, right? Again, this, just so you know, this happens in lots of different things. In the school that had the Spanish wing, those kids, they're just English language learners, right? That's the only separation between them. Those kids don't travel with the rest of the school on the 9th grade field trip, the 10th grade field trip. They have to go on a different day. Okay? So these kinds of practices are happening all the time, right? And it's not thought through. Like even when the young people confronted the administration, they didn't have a good reason. And in fact, they later changed it. But part of it was they didn't have a reason. It was just their practice. Okay, so let me just share with you Amir's poem, and then we can either open up for questions depending on time, or I'm going to be in one of the workshops so we can talk then. So they each did individual poems, and at the end of the DVD, you can access each of their poems.
I was walking up the street with my boy Anthony and this other kid. Anthony was making jokes, and the other kid turned around and asked, "Are you in special ed?" Anthony turned and said, "Yes." Soon after being in my 6-person class, like yesterday, I remember, South Orange Maplewood School District classified me. It was December 2000, She said I was eligible for special ed. Possessing this label they gave me, I swallowed the stigma and felt the pain of being seen in a room with 6 people. Yeah, it fell upon me, and the pain was like stones that rained down on me. From the days where school assemblies seemed segregated, and I had to watch my girl Crystal from balconies, away from the normal kids, to the days where I found myself fulfilling self-fulfilled prophecies. See, I received the label of special education, and it sat on my back like mountains being lifted by an ant. It just can't happen. It was my mind's master. It told me I was dumb. I didn't know how to act in a normal class. I needed 2 teachers to fully grasp the concepts touched upon in class, and my classification would never allow me to exceed the track of 2. So what is it that I do? So many occasions when the classification caused me to break into tears, it was my frustration. My reactions to teachers speaking down to me when I talked to them, saying I'm classified and it's my fault, had me truly believing inferiority was my classification. 'Cause I still don't know. And the pain was deep. The pain. Oh God, the pain. The ridicule. The constant taunting, the laughing when they passed me by, told me that community college should be my goal. It wasn't until Miss Cooper came and rescued me with her history class. Showed me the importance of my history, and told me the secrets my ancestors held. She told me about the Malcolms and the Huey Newtons. She told me to speak out because this is the story of many, and none of them are speaking. But the silence, oh God, the silence is just too painful.
So Amir ended up going to St. Peter's College, and he's now a history teacher in Newark. And I met up with him recently at a meeting for teachers who are interested in doing participatory action research in their classrooms and figuring out how to adapt PAR to classroom settings. There's a new standard in the New Jersey set of educational standards.
Co-curriculum content standards.
Say again?
New Jersey co-curriculum content standards?
Yes, the curriculum standards. It actually provides a really nice opening. I forget the language, I should have brought it with me, but it provides a really nice opening in the so that you're meeting standards for the state curriculum to do research in your classes, to ask sort of hard questions, and it's, I think, under civic education is maybe where it is, and not just, usually it's in social studies that you can find language to slide it in, but this is actually, I think, in civic and social responsibility or something like that. So that is not available in all states, so it's a really exciting new thing that's happening here. I think it's in this next year's whatever standards. I don't know if they're revised every year or not, but I think they were literally just revised. The woman who wrote the language was talking to us and encouraging us to make full use of it. So at any rate, like I said, so now he is himself a history teacher after being told that he would, that community college would be his best bet. I think what these young people sort of demonstrate is that it is possible to create spaces where we can come to realize what Hannah Arendt called our web of relations, right? Or Gloria Anzaldúa called it nosotras. Gloria Anzaldúa was a poet and borderland theorist, sort of not just talking about confronting borders, but thinking about how when you live in the borderlands, when you live across multiple identities and sort of recognize your intersectionality, that you start to realize how all of us are actually, as I was saying earlier, implicated in each other's lives, right? That she took the word nosotras, which means we in Spanish, and put a little hyphen between the nos and the otras. So nos is sort of short for we, otras is others. And with the diminishing divide in between, she said, really, we're all part of each other in that we live next to each other, we go to school together, we sit on the bus by each other, and eventually these hardened categories that we tend to think of as like, white, female, black, gay, special ed, whatever, that those borders become porous, right? And that we learn from each other, we like pieces of each other, we incorporate each other into how we come to understand ourselves. And I think this work, when you allow openings for it, when you don't turn away, a teacher I was just working with said, I had a Haitian girl in my class, and when the disaster happened, I didn't want to bring up bad memories for her, so I didn't talk about it. And he was saying, this is a good thing. And I was thinking, what a heartbreak, right? The young woman is living that pain, whether we turn a blind eye or we engage it, right, and figure out what to do. So I think this kind of work creates those spaces. And I'm happy to talk with you about it more, but I know that we've run out of time, so thank you very much.
Another round of applause for she used accessible language, and this is just a recharge to really make students the center of what we do and give them opportunities to question and respond to the world. As James Baldwin said, to real patriotism is questioning your country, and schools lie in our country, so they're a part of it. So this was a brilliant blend of scholarship and artistic expression. So 3 words: by the book. Okay? What we're going to do is, we're running a little fast, but we're going to be okay. We're going to present our lesson plan contest winners. We are going to present them briefly, and we will go from there, okay?
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Dobrik, and I'm part of this wonderful diversity committee. And I would also like to thank Professor Tory for that wonderful presentation. I'll be very brief, but I'm starting with a quote too, which is by Henry David Thoreau. And it is, if you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them. I think Maria Elena and many of us are trying to do this. We have a lot of lofty goals and dreams, and by becoming teachers, you all have the opportunity to build foundations under these castles in the air. So without further ado, we had a lesson plan contest for real lessons that our beginning teachers are doing with students that incorporate themes of diversity and work towards social justice. Our first place winner, who will come up and briefly tell us about her lesson plan, is Amy Roberto. Please.
Okay, I'll be very brief. My lesson plan was, I'm an English major. I'm in Teaneck High School. That is my placement. I have all ICS classes, which is all new to me. And I was asked to teach A Streetcar Named Desire. And in the book, the main guy, Stanley, is very abusive, and it's something that I never learned in high school. The teachers kind of said, oh, you could cover it, but, get on with it. And basically, I was like, no, they should talk about this. And it's an awkward thing and daunting to talk about with a bunch of kids, but I created a lesson to talk about domestic violence, and I related it to Chris Brown and Rihanna, and I played an interview, and we showed pictures and just talked about how we felt about it, just on like a very one-on-one level. And the kids really responded. We did a physical barometer, which is an activity where you move your body physically, which is great for block scheduling, if you keep that in mind, to move around and just to move around to different parts of the room to show their views on certain questions. And debates just started. Kids were yelling across the room in a good way about what they thought, that, that's not abusive. I would do that with my girlfriend, or my boyfriend does that to me. Or, well, you would do the same thing, and some kids who view it different. So it was just very interesting that we all do things different, but at the same time, if we don't talk about these awkward conversations and these hard subjects to bring into the classroom, they're never going to be easy to talk about. So if we don't create the opportunities for students to feel comfortable asking questions and not feeling dumb or not feeling scared or, well, we don't really talk about this subject in class, that they can ask anything and we can talk about anything and you can say anything and somebody will listen. So that's what we're listening for.
Thanks, Amy. Our second place winner was Lauren Rito.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm kind of nervous, but my name's Lauren and I'm an early childhood education major here at William Paterson. And I feel that teaching tolerance in schools can be a very complex and challenging issue. Classrooms today are full of culturally diverse children from various educational, literacy, and socioeconomic backgrounds. As a future teacher, I do plan to teach about justice and equity in the classroom. The lesson plan that I taught to second graders was based on the book Amazing Grace. And in this book, a child is told by her classmates that she cannot be Peter Pan in the school play because she is black and she is a girl. And in the end of the book, she was able to show the children that yes, she could be Peter Pan if she tried hard enough. So this lesson and discussion gave children a chance to explore the basic concepts of equality and how to be fair and respectful toward others. They were able to recognize that people are not to be limited because of their race and gender. This was definitely a new concept for some of the children. After the discussion, the children created character collages in which they used magazines to cut out pictures and words that describe themselves, and they could see how everyone's different, and we shared them together, and they also wrote about how the story made them feel. And I feel that teaching children to find their voices and have them say, I want to change that at young ages is really good, and teachers should strive for that.
Thank you so much. And our third place winner is Jacqueline Manrique.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you. It was a great opportunity. Thank you for my mom as well for joining me here today. Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. I mean, it really did spark, especially, it is true, sometimes we say, oh, the children are too young, etc., but it starts with us. We're the adults, we're the ones that need to be ready for anything, actually. And my lesson was geared for my kindergarten students. I'm a North teacher, and I'm a graduate student here studying a bilingual major. My lesson was about a career day, where each child had the opportunity to speak about what career they would want and what are the reasons on how they can and be the difference in their career chosen, in their community, their school, their home, and the world. So I know it must be a lot for young learners, but actually they were ready for it and they were giving such great ideas. They weren't nervous, they were just sharing with each other, and especially from the beginning of the year, we actually had to work at it because my classroom is really diverse and from every background, ethnicity, their religion, etc. But with prior lessons, they know how to respect each other, listen to one another. When they always ask questions, especially encouraging each other with snappy snaps and giving each other a special comment and a question, positive questions, and that really helped them, especially with the lesson with Career Day. They actually drew and wrote about their chosen dream career and wrote the reasons on it, and then we were able to make a dream quilt where they can see all their dreams, and eventually down the line they can make it a reality where they know how to not to give up. And it's about sparking the minds of the young learners, and you're gonna see the sprinkled seed that you put in them is gonna come out into their families and into your future endeavors. Thank you very much.